Welcome to AI Unveiled. Today, I'm speaking with Dimitris Nikolaou, co-founder and CEO of Wondercraft, an AI-powered audio editor to create ads, podcasts, audiobooks, and more simply by typing. Welcome, Dimitri.
Hey, Gaurav. Thank you very much for the kind words, and very happy to be here.
All right, to kick things off, maybe just tell us about your background before you started Wondercraft.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Greece. In my background, there's a lot of basketball. I was a competitive athlete growing up. In fact, it was a guiding factor for me to decide where to go for higher education. I never really considered in staying in Greece for, I would say, not necessarily lack of opportunities, but just wanted to expand what was available to me in the early years of my life. So that was why I wanted to just explore what's out there. And then eventually, I just ended up going to the UK. And then first 4 years of my time in the UK, I was playing a lot of basketball, but also studying. In the beginning, it was economics, and actually stopped for a year and ended up going for a year to work for a hedge fund in Mayfair in London. The biggest thing that I connected to during my time at the hedge fund was the quant machine running behind it, and I connected really well with programmers. That was my first exposure to Python and coding generally. And then I returned to university. Even though I was doing economics, I focused a lot on stats and data science. That was my first interaction. I did what many people do, at least used to do, when they first wanted to get into AI, which was the course on Coursera from Andrew Ng on just the basics of AI. And that was it wasn't AI, it was machine learning 101.
I took that course.
It was really useful. It was actually quite practical. And just based on that, started on a path that eventually led me to Imperial, just doing a conversion course, search computer science. Imperial was amazing, just very intense year. And from Imperial was recruited from Palantir, which was probably the most impactful step in my life so far. Just the amount of people that I met at Palantir, and the exposure into trying to close a big customer, the opportunity to be leading such conversations. Palantir is truly a special place, and it just eventually led me to have the opportunity of meeting some people that eventually led to us joining forces to start Wondercraft. So that was kind of everything before Wondercraft.
Well, that's awesome. Well, we've talked a few times. I never knew your love and professionalism in basketball. So that's great to see. So maybe now to kick things off, for those who aren't familiar, can you explain what Wondercraft does?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the easiest way to explain it for someone that has this first interaction is most people are familiar with what Canva does. Canva, in case someone doesn't know, made it very easy for someone to create graphics, whether that's an invitation for a party or a wedding or a social media post. So there's a ton of uses on Canva. And we're doing the same thing, but for audio. So whether you want to create, it could be an ad for radio or Spotify, or a meditation for your fitness studio, or an audiobook if you're a writer, or a podcast if you want to do some thought leadership. You can do everything with just a piece of software, basically. And all of this is based on AI voices, including the ability to clone your own voice so that you can use your own voice in case that's important for brand values. So in a nutshell, that's what Wondercraft does.
Awesome. And we talked a little bit about the importance of voice in an LLM world, and probably that's part of the inspiration. It seems like a really good idea. But you talked a little bit about your background. Maybe can you talk about that moment where you're like, okay, I need to leave this awesome job at Palantir and start Wondercraft? And how did you even go about kind of forming and picking who you're going to work with, the founding story?
Yeah, absolutely. So just being honest, it wasn't as if there was this large vision for years to come in relation to voice and audio. This was an idea that formed after we had kind of made a decision of going down a path of starting our own company. In terms of how we decided to go down that path, and then I'll speak a little bit more about the forming of the Wondercraft idea. As I mentioned before, Palantir is truly a special place. And if Palantir does one thing very well. That's to recruit very talented people. There's a very thought through and stringent interview process, and it's all a very important pillar to it is the referral process to it. So uh, I don't know if you're aware, but Peter Thiel is one of the founders of Palantir. And Peter Thiel was, before Palantir, there was a lot. He was one of the founders of PayPal, which had the same principles that I'm about to mention, which is what's the most important thing to do is hire the smartest people in your friend circle and just keep going by these nodes increasing. And whoever you bring in, they hire very smart people. And given that you never drop the level of people that you bring in, the assumption is that the friends of smart people will also be smart people, so you can just keep going in that direction. Obviously, Peter Thiel with PayPal, you see that working very well. And Peter Thiel, obviously a legend today, and part of PayPal was Elon Musk, another legend, and also David Sachs. So obviously another very impactful. So you can see how, that was 30 years ago, 25 years ago when they were starting PayPal, and the team that they brought together back then is so impactful today. They're the leaders of the free world. And it was kind of the same at Palantir. As a result, it's kind of a feature and a bug for Palantir, because it's a feature given that everyone is doing incredible things in their first 3-4 years of being a Palantir. However, eventually everyone wants to go and do their own, build their own thing. So, attrition is quite high after that point, just because it's in the nature of people, and it doesn't matter how much money you give them. People just want to go and start their own thing. And I was surrounded by people doing incredible things. After Palantir, like an example was Helsink had started a few years before I left Palantir, from former Palantir engineers, and many more other companies that started from Palantir employees. So that was kind of we were well aware that that was a path rather than just going to another company. And as a result, what happens a lot of Palantir is that pools form of people that are considering of starting a company together.
Yeah.
I was very fortunate to have very close friends within Palantir that I could trust in expressing my vision and the direction that I wanted my life to take. That was before, again, any ideas of startups. So we formed a group together with one of my closest friends, Yusuf Risk at Palantir. And we just decided that it was time for us to make the next step. That was 4 years in, and 4 years in the Palantir. And we just took the leap of leading Palantir and then just having some time where we will get the opportunity to explore of what's out there. We were fortunate enough to be accepted into Y Combinator without really having an understanding or a direction as to where we would going. We did have one concept that eventually we moved away from. But that was everything in terms of the founding story of us.
You decided you want to start a company without having a specific idea, and took the plunge without having a specific idea. And I think, it's amazing that the culture Palantir, or at least the culture of the people at Palantir, supports that. Second, hopefully when you embark on something, you're going to spend the next decade plus of your life. And it seems a bit silly not to spend at least a handful of months and iterations to figure out what that is before, right? So I think that's quite smart to do. And we should now talk about Wondercraft. And actually, let's not even talk about Wondercraft to begin with. Let's talk about the bigger picture, which is podcasts and media and entertainment, and of course, AI. How do you see AI influencing traditional media and entertainment going forward?
Yeah, I don't know how it influences traditional media necessarily if we speak about TV, because I think that the way that AI influences generally is that we see it coming into this new media, which I would say more into the social media stuff. I would say that there's maybe a couple of categories that AI is influencing. The first one is that just being an incredible assistant. There's AIs in the LLMs specifically having incredible reasoning capabilities, and those are just incredible assistants in the creative iteration, creative ideation, with just thinking about new ideas. Just basically very good in being a partner and you throwing some ideas and then just telling you if expanding on those. So that's the first one. Just
Almost
very
like an
good.
editor, like.
Yeah, just very good partner for coming up with ideas. Um, and I would say that the second bigger category is producing assets, right? So we see that there's a lot going on into the image generation, or maybe that's old news already. Like Midjourney and DALI, Stable Diffusion being kind of the base for everything. We're at an extremely good point where AI image generation is basically 99.9% there in relation to actual images. Very hard to tell that someone is not, or like that a person, like an image of a person was generated using AI. So that's one example, and then it goes into when you combine multiple frames of images, you get the video, which like there's it's a horizontal on itself, right? Like what is video? There's the avatars where Hagen and Synthesia are doing really well at. There's synthetic video. We've seen like some stuff from Sora, OpenAI, and of course there's other companies like Pika, Runway, Luma that they're all doing very advanced. They all have very advanced technologies into creating synthetic video. It's still not 100%. You can tell that there's some AI in it, but to be honest, there's some intriguing value in that. Like the fact that it's AI, like, okay, who cares? Like meaning it's different to the footage that I would have shot from a human, but like it's very interesting, having like a human head blow up, like expand, for example, and then just minimize, like, which is a new model from Runway. That's just like we couldn't have done that using like footage, and that's just very fun to see. So that's the second category is video, which on its own has many components. And then we see a third one, which of course is like the audio aspect of it. And that's generation of voice, generation of music. Generation of music, we see that it's actually at a very good point. It's facing a little bit of a battle with IP right now. And, how did these music tracks get trained? I won't touch too much into that, but for anyone that wants to go deeper, there's a leader in Suno and Video, I think are the two biggest players. So feel free to check those out. And then there's voice, right? And there's a ton that you can do with voice. And obviously there's a few different players in this space. We're not developing the voice models, so I'm happy to refer to the companies that do. And one of them is a company from a close friend called ElevenLabs, which many people will be familiar with, I believe. They have emerged as the leaders into voice technology and developing hyper-realistic voices. However, they're not the only player, right? So there are competitors in many startups in them. That said, I don't believe that any of them are actually as good. One distinction here, however, is that there are big companies like Google and OpenAI that have released very high quality models, and those are actually valid competitors. You can see the results from one of them, or you can see the results from Google on Notebook LM, where those voices are just incredible, right? It's just something else. The quality of those podcasts is just incredibly realistic, and I think it's been a very important factor as to why AI podcasts are now part of the zeitgeist. And I'm happy to speak a little bit more about that in a sec. And then OpenAI, like, I don't know if you've used the app of ChatGPT, but you can speak to it, and the advanced voice control that they have now is just also like those voices, something else. And OpenAI has released those voices over API. So we see that there's advancements in the technology and the foundational models of voice as well. And the combination, just going back to your question, the combination of image generation, video generation, and voice generation is what really enables this new wave of media production that I think will be quite important in the next chapter of media production.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the why now is quite clear with these advancements in foundational technologies, let's call it. And it'd be good to talk a little bit more about, as a startup, where do you think you innovate versus rely on foundational technologies? Before we get to that, though, let's talk about one or two of these voice use cases. Let's start with podcasts. You mentioned Notebook LM. I've been creating some Notebook LM audio summaries, mainly for internal consumption. At the same time, most podcasts I listen to are still human generated. And so how do you think that kind of plays out? And what's the state today? And yeah, how do you think it plays out over the next couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And I think that so we're very used to podcasts being basically synonymous with what we're doing right now, the two-person conversation, two-person interview. However, there's many use cases for podcasts, right? Like an example is the New York Times Daily, which is just basically news dissemination, news information being spread out. And for that, realistically, what's the most important is not so much the discussion or like the banter between humans, but more so the consistency behind it, having the opportunity to do this on a daily basis and having the opportunity to use AI that significantly helps in making the process a lot faster and easier. If that is what unlocks the daily news information to be spread out, then that's actually a huge unlock and a very big use case for Wondercraft creators. They are creating news podcasts for their own distinct category. As an example, one is a dentistry in up in Canada, in Toronto. They're not just like a dentistry, but more so like a dental. Just creating content around that and having the opportunity to create like a daily news around what's new in the dental industry. That's something that allowed a community to be built around them, and they wouldn't have had the opportunity to like have this consistency with a daily podcast. Something very similar with a golf club down in Florida, where they create for all of their audience. They create a daily podcast on like what were the scores in golf yesterday, and they just a lot of information, and then it's basically just an opportunity to um, keep your audience engaged in a different medium. Our goal here with creating Wondercraft is not to try and mimic like what we're doing here, like for podcasts specifically, not to try and mimic like what we're doing here, but more so to just lower the barrier for anyone that has a media, has a story to share, and they want to do it in the audio medium to be able to
Yeah.
do so without facing the restrictions of having a good microphone and knowing how to edit and all of that, and just use basically the same way that they would write a Google Doc, they can create a podcast.
Yeah, that's and actually I was gonna ask the question around how do you balance AI's creative potential with the authenticity of human storytelling? And are there certain, when you look at your product strategy, there's certain things like, look, we're not going to do that, right? Or, how is it a multiplier versus, like what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of that. As I said, like the core pillar of upon which we're building the company is to empower human creativity. So everything gets filtered through that. An example would be we wouldn't want to just press a button without having like some ideas come from you, and then just you get a podcast that you publish. Like the starting point for every generation is you
Yes.
prompting, coming up from with like you know what are the scores from that golf match yesterday, or like if you're creating an ad, what's the creative direction behind it. um, Look, at the end of the day, Wondercraft is a platform, is a tool, and it just enables you to share your story in just an easier way.
What about personalization? Is that important? I don't know if you can still call it podcast, because as you were saying that, I was like, if my daily news even comes from New York Times and yours, I probably may want to listen to something different than you based on interest. What role do you think that has, especially when it comes to podcasts?
Yeah, I don't know, Gaurav. I'd probably throw that back to you, to be honest. I don't know more than you in relation to this. The only thing that I will say is that I have thought about this quite a lot, not just me, the team. Maybe a direction that we did consider at some point with Wondercraft is that of personalized podcasts. So we evaluated and assessed that by speaking to people like yourself that do consume podcasts and just basically assessing if you would be interested in creating something that's very personal to you and delivering that to your feed on a day-to-day basis. I think, to be honest, at the end of the day, there's a lot in the podcast space or in the podcast consumption behavior, where it's a lot about exploration and
Yeah.
having the opportunity to just listen to new ideas rather than the ones that you've asked for. And I don't know if let's call it a consumer play into this podcast space, turning this into a B2C and going into maybe, instead of you listening to, I don't know, Diary of a CEO this morning, listening to your personalized 20 minutes. I don't know if this would play out. I'm not sure if I myself would listen to what I've ordered. There is definitely like potentially an element of maybe you can crop some of your favorite podcasts and do a little bit of exploration as to like 5 minutes of Diary CEO, 5 minutes of Call Her Daddy, 5 minutes of Armchair Expert, 5 minutes of 20 VC. And then based on that, you can get some, sense of what you actually
Yeah.
want to listen to. There's many directions that you can take this to. And yes, if that was your question, I will say that it's possible to do. And you see that with Notebook 11, for example. You can create like personal podcasts about something that you want to consume. It's not really part of the DNA of Wondercraft. Part of the DNA of Wondercraft is to enable creators to share their stories with others. So we haven't gone down that direction, but I would be interested to hear your opinion and if you think that you would listen to such content.
Yeah. Well, what I would say is, one, in a way, you're already personalizing by enabling more niche podcasts to happen, because personalization also can happen just by picking and choosing the podcast you want to listen to. I would say there could be certain narrow use cases like news and sports updates where I hesitate to even call it a podcast, but an audio update kind of could make sense. And then, as you brought up, I think in the discovery process, something around a programmatic snippets. And I think there's a lot of inspiration one can take from Spotify, what they're doing around music and the yearly wrap, right? That could make sense. So my reaction as I think in real time is, I don't think at scale I would be that interested, because exploration and human authenticity could get compromised. But I think there could be certain kind of your daily, daily update or weekly wrap or something like that, which could make sense to me.
Yeah. Maybe just a final point on this is that I think that the way that we're progressing right now with AI voice assistants, as an example, I mentioned previously, ChatGPT app has a very powerful voice assistant, and I think Siri is going to improve. I do think that the audio updates, you can probably, realistically, in 1 year's time, the personalized audio update will be getting delivered from your AI voice assistant rather than you requiring to have a daily, update on your RSS feed. So from a business perspective, that's another reason why we didn't want to get involved into that more.
Yeah, and then I also think the daily update, I think in the workplace scenario, is probably even more relevant, and that of course is outside the scope, and maybe a universal assistant doing that can make sense.
Right. Exactly.
But let's talk about ads a little bit. I listen to a lot of podcasts. While walking, I listen to a lot of ads. Most of them are still narrated by the host. And so where are we in kind of the state of programmatic audio ads today? And where do you think that goes in the next few years?
Yeah, there's actually a lot changing right now. Obviously, I understand that you listen to a lot of podcasts. So a lot of your like audio interaction comes from podcasts, but you shouldn't forget that there's a lot of other audio in this space, radio being a prime example, that it does not want to die, despite the fact that we thought it would over 10 years ago. It's still around, especially in less westernized countries, let's call it, less developed countries. Radio is still very prominent, and creating ads for radio is actually still very important. Spotify, you probably might have like a premium subscription, but we forget that, 15% of or between 10 and 15% of revenue for Spotify comes from ads, because they're still on the, there's the free plan that delivers ads. So Spotify, that's just one example. Amazon Music, many other of these streaming services have audio ads. And then there is so much more, right? Like you like walk into a shop in the US, like a grocery shop, they would play ads over audio that's not on radio, the ones that they are creating. So those are just the ones that exist currently. And I think that the way that we're going as a society, where, as I mentioned before, like ChatGPT, the voice assistant, and just generally we saw that with Tesla as well, voice interfaces are going to become extremely prominent with the advancement of both voice, but also reasoning capabilities and speed of LLMs to be able to answer something fast. So the combination of both will make voice interfaces extremely prominent, which means that attention will shift a little bit there, attention of businesses and advertising. And I do believe that in the future, there could be space for ads in that interaction as well, meaning the interaction with the voice interfaces. So that's just where like the future, like that's the beginning of what I mentioned about Spotify, radio, shops, but also like just so many more that currently have the audio ads. And then the future, I do see a huge feature in voice interfaces. And that's the reason why for us, audio ads is actually a very important factor. And the reason why we have like a big part of our user group right now. And I do think that it's only going to keep expanding as we go more into the voice interfaces.
So today, I believe Wondercraft mostly focuses on audio. What about video? Obviously, there's a correlation between the two. This podcast would be in audio, but also video format. How do you view video in terms of kind of your future planning at Wondercraft?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as I mentioned previously, like the cornerstone and the DNA of the company has been the creation, giving the ability for anyone to create, to share their stories without having the requirement to record and edit. We want to give the opportunity for anyone to share their stories. We started from the audio space because realistically, when we started, only voice was there, video was not there, neither was image necessarily. And I think at the moment we're the leading company in creative storytelling in the audio space. But as I said, our vision and our mission is a little bit more expansive than just audio. And we have been considering of like what is that good and an engaging video so that people can create content, whether that's audio or video, using Wondercraft. And we're investing a lot of time right now in figuring out what's that best way to create engaging content. At the end of the day, what's important is you want to communicate a story that you have in your head. And Wondercraft is going to be, at the moment, is the place where you can share that story in audio. And in the long term, it's going to be the place where you can create, you can express yourself in any medium, and you can create like a story, a production, content, whether that's audio or video.
Awesome. And that's probably a good segue into kind of talking about your tech or AI stack. You already mentioned using ElevenLabs for some of the text-to-speech. You mentioned Runway and Pika a few times, whether or not to use them or plan to, but just, where do you have proprietary technology? Where do you rely on foundational models, whether it's OpenAI, whether it's ElevenLabs? And maybe it'd be good to just get a high-level overview of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So at a high level, our differentiating factor, it relies on two things. The first one is building proprietary tech on top of foundational models. And the second thing is providing a very easy to use UI so that we can provide value on top of these foundational models and our proprietary tech. So these are the two core pillars upon which Wondercraft is built. The first one, as I mentioned, is building proprietary tech on top of foundational models. So to speak a little bit on that, I'll just mention which foundational models are being used, or like at least which categories. We have two components. The first one is using LLMs in order to craft the script that you're going to use as your basis for either the copy for your ad or the script for your meditation or for your podcast. So using LLMs on top of that. And then proprietary technology on top of that is actually quite limited. It's nothing too much, basically just guardrails on top of those LLMs so that we can lead you to some script that will actually be effective. So that's what we do in relation to LLMs. Maybe just one more thing is having a big library of prompts that we already know that are effective just to get you going. All you need to do is change some variables within that. So as I mentioned before, the creativity still comes from you. So that's in relation to LLMs. The second component where we've actually iterated a lot on creating a lot of proprietary tech on top of is voice AI. And it's what you would expect given that, that's like the primary reason of why people come to our platform. For voice AI, there's, as I mentioned in the beginning, there's a few different models that we use, ElevenLabs being one of them, and then OpenAI Google, and some other companies in Asia that specialize in Asian languages. And obviously, these companies are doing great and having very realistic voices. We wanted to go one level more, right? And what's important for us is people are creating content, and we're the last stop. We own the timeline, meaning that people create content that is going to be published directly from us. It's not going to go anywhere else. So we need, apart from having the opportunity to have hyper realistic voices, which is not enough, we need the opportunity to have the opportunity to edit the outcome of a voice, right? So you do text to speech, and then you get an outcome based on the AI god of what they will give you. But sometimes you might want to make that voice a little bit more excited or a little bit more energetic or maybe more sad, whatever it is. So that's something that we provide. At the moment on Wondercraft, we've built proprietary tech that doesn't exist anywhere else, not even like ElevenLabs or any of the foundational models, where we have the opportunity to deterministically add an emotion, make it excited, change its accent, make it British, make it American, have it imitate another voice. Say you like the sound of Dimi's voice, but you like the intonation and accent and enthusiasm of Gaurav. You can actually mix those two voices, and it's going to sound like Dimi, but it's going to have the accent of Gaurav. That's another part. Or you have a piece of technology called director mode that literally allows you to interact or chat with the AI voice and ask it, like, can you do this a lot slower? Can you introduce a stutter? Can you speak as if you have a mouth full of food? Can you change your accent as if you're like French? Anything. You can really interact with it. So those levels of technology did not exist anywhere else and were required for our users to be able to create engaging content. We invested a lot of time and research onto building on top of that. And I'm very confident that no one else is doing that right now, because meaning the foundational models, because in many of these cases, we're actually mixing some of the best of each model. So like mixing the best of OpenAI and the best of ElevenLabs to get that director mode that I mentioned. So that's the proprietary tech that I mentioned and our differentiating factor. So that was like the first core pillar. The second core pillar that differentiates us is that UI, and we've invested a lot of time and really have been inspired by Canva in creating a design, a UX that makes it easy for anyone without having any experience in audio content to be able to create audio very easily. In fact, our founding designer was the founding designer of Canva.
Nice.
We were very proud to have DTA in the team, based on that, like we've been inspired from the ease of use of Canva to create something very equivalent for Wondercraft for the audio space. And the combination of the ease of use together with our proprietary tech is our differentiating factor on top of the foundational ones.
That's great. And I've obviously signed up for Wondercraft, and I can attest to the ease of use. Even I am able to make edits. And, obviously you mentioned you're using the different foundational models and you have your proprietary tech on top. Given you are taking advantage of these foundational models and they're not always cheap, how sensitive are you to the cost? And does that eat into your margins of the business, or is it really not an issue at this point?
This last point that you made at this point was actually quite important into my answer. In the beginning, it was. However, in building Wondercraft, we recognized that we're living in a world where we had seen that in the past from like other foundational models. So we were quite confident that it will happen in voice as well, where all of the voice models are effectively the model itself is becoming commoditized, meaning there's many companies that are competing in just that foundational model, and many companies have the hyper realistic voice. So the cost of that is being driven down. Even ElevenLabs has cut its costs, and OpenAI and Google, those costs are actually significantly less. So at this point, I wouldn't say that the foundational model itself is the biggest cost factor into building Wondercraft. And if anything, we are living in a world where these prices are being driven down quite excellent in an accelerated pace.
Yeah, that makes sense. You talked a lot about the different use cases in which Wondercraft is being used, but maybe are there a couple of specific examples that were either highly innovative or surprising of your customers using the Wondercraft platform?
Yeah, I mean, we never thought we never really considered meditations. For some reason,
Mm.
we never went there. But it's actually maybe about 25% of our users right now are creating
Oh, wow.
meditations
Okay.
um, on Wondercraft. That's one case. One that I really love right now is actually AI podcasts are making a killing in the student space, whether that's like upper high school or in the early days of university. And the use case that is playing out a lot is, I don't know if when you were at school, there's usually like one person that has the best revision notes, and we would all like kind of scramble to get those revision notes to study before like exams and tests. Something that is being done a lot is like there is this one person or the teacher that invests a little bit of time in creating a revision podcast for all of the class based on the study material. And then everyone just wants to listen to that podcast just because it's a lot more effective. Obviously, like you can also ask like Notebook LM to get something like more personalized. But um, the thing is, with Notebook LM, it's quite generic, right? And it will never touch all of the points that you want, no matter how much information you give it. Whereas if someone is actually curating the content that is going in there, that makes a lot of difference. And that's a pretty cool use case that we're seeing right now. And maybe a third one is touching again on Notebook LM. There's a ton of users that are creating the base on Notebook LM, and then just bringing it in Wondercraft. We have this ability to just take in existing audio content, like the one that we're creating right now, and break it down into the individual speakers. And then you can just edit the text in any way you want. Just have basically Demi say something different. Of course, you need to have the rights to do so. With Notebook LM, as we know, the conversation is very engaging, but it's sometimes very generic, and it's always like the deep dive. What you can do is bring that Notebook LM in, swap the voice to be your voice, change to have a title that you like.
That's really cool.
Speak about something that you want, and actually turn that into content that you can push out, because Notebook LM you really can't right now.
And that seems like an important enough use case where I see it as a prominent banner on your homepage when I go to Wondercraft AI. So it's always good to capture the tailwind of things that are kind of getting viral. That's awesome. And you got over 100,000 users now. How did you get the flywheel started? How, any kind of tactics you can share on kind of acquiring and engaging your first customers?
Yeah, actually, our website is a little bit stale on that, closer to 150, maybe approaching 200,000 now.
Awesome.
But I would say that the way that we acquired our first users is a little bit different of the way that we acquire them now. So I'll speak a little bit about both. The way that we acquired our first users was basically just playing a little bit on the Twitter space. There's a lot of at least when we were starting, there was a lot of like hype on these new AI tools, and many AI influencers, if we can call them that, were posting new tools. So all that we needed to create was just a very highly engaging video that's basically showing, hey, you can create a podcast using AI, which was kind of the very beginning of Wondercraft. And people shared a lot about us. So that kind of was the initial point that delivered everything, or delivered the very first users. However, there wasn't really a flywheel at that point, right? It was just bringing in some users. At this point, it's a little bit more of a science of having people come in. For us, what has worked extremely well is SEO, and we acquire a ton of users through SEO currently. And apart from that, there's a big, like maybe let's call it a marketing engine that runs from people that enter our funnel through our web pages, our SEO, and then whether that's a drip campaign or they follow us on socials after that, or we send out a newsletter that's actually quite engaging. That's actually a little bit more. Apart from that, a third component that we are investing a little bit of work on now is creating a community around Wondercraft. Like we've reached a point where well-populated cities have decent or a critical mass of Wondercraft users that can create a fun event. And as an example, a month or 2 weeks ago, we had our first in-person community event where over 100 people came to our London event, where we partnered with Canva. We did it at Canva's office. It was just basically Wondercraft users, where we just wanted to get them together, speak a little bit more about the vision and the growth of the company, where it's going, what they'll be able to do in a few months' time, and basically just for us to have an opportunity to meet them, but also for them to meet what other creators on Wondercraft are doing, was very valuable. So that for us, like community, it's a little bit more than just like a growth node. Obviously, it's very important for us because it also, connecting to the people that use your product is very good at like an emotional level. But apart from that, it's a very big factor into how we get informed about what we should build next. So maybe that goes a little bit into the product. So for us right now, the flywheel is SEO that leads into marketing, that leads into like building a community. And it all is actually encapsulated into a very good product-led growth strategy. And that's why we have someone with the experience of DTA that's leading our design of the product. So that's kind of the flywheel of growth of Wondercraft right now.
To close out, it's 2025. What are one or two product features or initiatives that you are most excited about for the new year?
Yeah, so touching on something that I mentioned before, for us, I think 2025 is going to be very big for video. So there's a lot that you should expect from the team on that. And I think we have the opportunity to lead the space in video creation. There's a lot that's being done in the video right now. And anyone that's listening might think that video is already saturated, but there's actually quite a few verticals within video. And I think that there is an opportunity for us to capture one of them. So that's something that we're very excited about. And we already start working towards that direction. And maybe another one is just turning Wondercraft into a fully collaborative environment, having the opportunity to basically work together with your team on Wondercraft. At the moment you can, but it's quite limited. We're getting inspired by both Notion and Canva on the collaborative features. So having the opportunity to you're creating an ad, you want your manager to approve it, or you share it with them. There's a whole approval flow, a commenting flow, or you're a creative agency, you want all of that flow. Like at the moment, you share MP3s over emails. That kind of sucks. So we want to own that space of the creative iteration. And maybe so that's like the second point. Then as a third point, and this is something that I'm super excited about. I can't share too much, but there's definitely going to be a lot of excitement around celebrity or well-known voices being in Wondercraft and the new year, and having the opportunity to use those voices for creating ads or anything else. And that, together with the approval flow that I mentioned before, becomes very, very powerful. And those are the three things that, at least for now, I'm super pumped about.
Well, I'm excited for you as well. These seem like amazing initiatives. I mean, in creative software generally, multiplayer mode I've seen time and time and again be one of a key reason for reduced churn, increased engagement. So it's awesome that you're working on it. And the initiatives around celebrity mode and video seem amazing as well. Well, look, this has been fantastic. Thank you for sharing your insights. So excited for you and the Wondercraft team. Maybe just to close out, how can our listeners learn more about Wondercraft and follow you?
Thank you, Gaurav. It's been amazing to be on this podcast, and I always enjoy our conversations. So thank you very much for the invite. In terms of how they can follow us, we're most active currently on LinkedIn. So just follow Wondercraft AI on LinkedIn. And maybe myself and my co-founder, the third co-founder that I didn't mention in the beginning, Oscar Sarander, we're particularly active on LinkedIn. So feel free to ping us a message there. Always happy to hear your thoughts, especially if you reach this point and you listen to this conversation. Would love to hear your thoughts. And I think maybe on Twitter as well, but although we are a little bit less active. So I mostly focus on LinkedIn now.
And everyone has some kind of creative aspect and probably dealing with video. So sign up for Wondercraft at wondercraft.ai.
For sure. Absolutely. Definitely test that out.
Yeah. Definitely test it out. On that note, thank you so much, Dimitri.
Thanks so much, Gaurav.